Okay, guys, here we are. It is the end of the line. And what I've decided to do for this last week of school is to give you some choice. As you turned in your Watergate assignment, that's the last thing that you've turned in. You're not going to be turning in any work for this, and it's really hard for me personally because like this is the stuff, the recent stuff that I feel we can really make connections with, and I think it's really important to be a good conscious citizen, to having an understanding of that. But it's whatever. Can't cry about it. So let's try to get it done. So I put together, as you see on this sheet, a list of resources and sort of an explanation for each of them. Some of them I got a little more wordy than others. And you can decide how you want to allocate your time. And you know what? You have these forever. So if you want to watch them later, if you have an interest in this stuff, I think all of it's good stuff, it's high production value, and it's stuff that I'd really like you to learn about in your one go round in US history. So the first topic is Vietnam, and I gave you a little bit of context for, while Vietnam is, I don't want to say fading from the collective memory, it's just not as much at the forefront of society as it once was. I kind of shared how it was very much a part of pop culture still in the 1980s, but then more importantly in politics, right? As President Clinton in his service in Vietnam was at the forefront of the 1992 election. And then again, John Kerry in the 2004 election. So I think it's real important to have an understanding of this. And also, as I explained to you, like this is not my interpretation of it. I mean, it's an established fact. We thought back in the 1960s that the communist push in Vietnam, North Vietnam, backing the communists, the Viet Cong in South Vietnam, was part of a Kremlin-driven, monolithic communist conspiracy and belief in this domino theory that if we allowed South Vietnam to turn communist, that all of Asia would go next. And it turns out, and this was revealed, even Secretary of Defense McNamara met with North Vietnamese leaders decades later, and they were like, yeah, we just wanted to be independent. We thought South Vietnam was a puppet of American imperialism, and we wanted them to be free. So it's some important lessons. So we got two things, and we got CNN in the 60s, the war in Vietnam, which sort of traces how, we just had a few advisors in Vietnam under the Kennedy administration, which got ratcheted up to 16,000 by 1963. But the South Vietnamese government that we were propping up under President Diem was so bad, was so corrupt. And when he's killed in a coup right before President Kennedy was killed, we sort of assume responsibility. And then it takes you through the Johnson years and the escalation of the war, ending with Johnson's frustration and announcing he's not running for president. Part two starts with 1968 in the traumatic election. And it shows the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, which is split between its continue the war and anti-war faction. Of course, Senator Kennedy was killed. Before that, he appeared to be the nominee who was going to end the war. And despite losing 1 out of every 8 American votes to horrible racist Governor George Wallace, Richard Nixon is able to win on the slogan "Peace with Honor." Sorry, froze there. Peace with honor in Vietnam. But the war, as this episode shows, it continues for 69, 70, 71, 72, until we finally withdraw. And then when North Vietnam breaks the peace, invades South Vietnam, by April of 1975, it's all over. So if you have an interest in Vietnam, those two videos do a really good job. All of these are about 40 minutes each. I think you walk out of there with a really good understanding of Americans' involvement in Vietnam. The next video is about the 1970s, and it's called The State of the Union is Not Good. I entitled the topic Malaise, as the quote, "The State of the Union is not good," was a quote by President Ford during his State of the Union address. And President Ford came in and had a real tough problem in that there was a real push to criminally prosecute Richard Nixon for his involvement in Watergate. As you just saw, he doesn't participate in the break-in, but he's clearly there in the cover-up. And President Ford's like, we have to govern, forget this. I'm pardoning him. He's not even charged with a crime, but he pardons President Nixon. He grants him a full and free pardon for any federal charges that would have been brought against him. And he has to deal with the stagflation of the 1970s, the structural shift in the American economy. Pittsburgh is becoming the Rust Belt. The auto industry is challenged by foreign manufacturers because the price of gas has gone up so much. And the auto industry is the biggest industry in America. I mean, it creates all sorts of problems. And Jimmy Carter comes in and wins as an outsider in 1976. But you'll see all the problems that he faced, not only with the stagflation and the energy crisis and the emergence of the Rust Belt, but also the foreign policy problems, most notably the humiliation of our embassy falling in Iran. And the 1970s were just not a very good time. And as we saw in our 1960, or no, what was that, in the feminism one, the Battle of the Sexes, sort of the groundwork was laid for a new conservative movement, which President Reagan becomes a much more pleasant face than Barry Goldwater was, and he wins election, defeats an incumbent in 1980. And so that's the next topic, is President Reagan, and there's a video called The Reagan Revolution, which talks about all of these new policies brought in by a conservative government. It is adored by some, it is condemned by others. But I want you to see sort of the different direction that the country took in the 1980s. And again, you're going to hear people from all different political persuasions arguing all sorts of different things about this. I'm just presenting it to you. The other part of this is the end of the Cold War. The episode is called Tear Down This Wall, which of course comes from the speech at the Brandenburg Gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And it's amazing how the Cold War ends with a whimper and not a bang. The only dude that gets lit up is Ceausescu, one of the worst of the Soviet-backed dictators in Romania. They have a kangaroo court and execute him and his wife Elena with Kalashnikovs out in the courtyard. It's pretty bad. But other than that, it is amazing how all of those countries that were behind the Iron Curtain were able to throw off their red masters. And there was not a violent response from the Soviet Union like they had in Hungary in 1956. Sorry, I didn't get to teach that to you. Or in Czechoslovakia with the Prague Spring in 1968. Sorry, I did not get to teach that to you. The next topic is technology and Wall Street, going from CNN the 80s. By the way, the malaise is from CNN the 70s. The State of the Union is not good. And both of the episodes, the Reagan Revolution and Tear Down This Wall, are from CNN the 80s. Also from CNN the 80s is the video on technology. I shared with you the experience. I could not believe in third grade when we got a computer for Christmas. And I mean, it's laughable. It's a joke, but to have a computer with just like a regular run-of-the-mill family was an indescribable thing. And while we didn't have the internet, it kind of sets the groundwork for a lot of technological developments. So there's some good stuff in there. And then there's another episode that I attached with that, and it's called Greed is Good. And that's, of course, the famous line from Michael Douglas, who plays Gordon Gekko, in the movie Wall Street by Oliver Stone. Martin Sheen is in it because he's his father. Charlie Sheen plays Bud Fox in that, and who's kind of like, basically it's about how greed drives a lot of criminal activity on Wall Street. That's the movie, right? With this is an intense period of deregulation, and the stock market really takes off. And there are very different opinions on this. Hey man, I'm not pushing anything. Just want you to watch this and sort of see some of the major developments that occur within the American economy during this time. Then finally, we've got President Clinton's impeachment. I wanted to make sure you had context, and as I put in that document, regardless of where you fall on it, the fact that President Trump was impeached is a big deal, just because it's only happened 3 times. And we don't get a lot of context out of Andrew Johnson. But with Richard Nixon, you saw, okay, there was a smoking gun, right? He had clearly participated in covering up Watergate. With Bill Clinton, we have the same thing where, we all heard the line, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. Well, there's physical evidence he did, okay? And it was, the 90s was a really intense partisan time. Clinton was very much liked by the left and very much not liked by the right. And he comes in and has a liberal agenda and just gets hammered. It's the gold standard of midterm defeats in 1994. He's being investigated. For they'll take you through this with the Whitewater real estate company, and that investigation into his past financial dealings now all of a sudden gets linked to, did he lie in a civil deposition? Because Bill Clinton, who even when he's running for office in 1992 had to admit to the Jennifer Flowers affair, and he still won, right? That's why he's the comeback kid. That's why he's Slick Willie. Nothing sticks to him, right? It's like the New Hampshire primary, and he's like, yeah, this woman's right. I was married at the time, and he still almost won New Hampshire and went on to win the nomination. So anyways, he had an established track record of doing these kind of things. And Paula Jones said that when Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas, he sexually harassed her. The legal term is the intentional infliction of emotional distress because of what he did. And he's being sued, and Bill Clinton's like, no, I'm president of the United States. I don't have time for a civil lawsuit. This can wait until after I'm president. And the Supreme Court of the United States in Clinton versus Jones says, no, Mr. President, you do not have immunity from a civil suit. This is going to go forward. And in the case of gathering evidence, they find out President Clinton had an affair with a White House intern in the Oval Office. And it kind of takes you through all of that stuff and how it gets linked to the Starr investigation, the Whitewater investigation, and how the internet breaks the story, and how President Clinton responds. As he doubles down with his lies publicly. He lies to his wife. His wife goes on TV and says this is part of a vast right-wing conspiracy. And then when Monica produces the dress, that's all she wrote. And Republicans are like, he's done. But then President Clinton actually, the American people forgave him. And it was really divisive because, as I shared with you, I was in grad school at this time, and you have, a faction of people saying, hey, he's a great president, the economy's doing great, all this good stuff is taking place, this is all a private affair, no pun intended. That's his and his wife's problem, basically. Versus another faction that would say, how can you have the president, the chief executive, so blatantly break the law and lie in a deposition? And you'll see it's all about parsing. Parsing is like arguing over the words is. You'll even hear President Clinton say that depends on what is. As I'm not going to get graphic with you, but he claims what they did is not technically sexual relations. I'll leave it at that. And it's a lot of legal wrangling. But anyways, the Republican Congress goes ahead and impeaches him anyways, and you'll hear Trent Lott. It's well, one of the things I don't understand is how this guy did something so bad, everybody knows he did it, but yet he gained in popularity. So it's just interesting to see. It was very different from the Nixon impeachment, very different than the Trump impeachment. I want you to see what happened. Then two other short things. I put a link to a National Geographic program on the 10th anniversary of 9/11 that follows President Bush through the day, and you really get a sense of just how unsettling the day was, and just because nobody knew what was happening. And I remember I was new teaching and shared with you the story in writing. The first reports about Shanksville that came out with Flight 93 was that it was headed to Pittsburgh, and everybody's really scared. And it's just really. It's a really interesting insight to see the president and how the events of 9/11 transpired for him that day. And they show a little bit of the aftermath with the "I Can Hear You" great speech. And then finally, the endless election in 2000, where for over a month we didn't know who was president, and the Supreme Court of the United States basically determined the presidency of the United States. And it's really interesting for those of you that are into that whole election thing. I think you'll really like that. So. We've got this Monday. We don't have school Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this week, Monday, Tuesday next week. And like I said, you've got this forever. So I got a lot of irons in the fire, getting ready for next year with summer assignment and stuff like that. But I'm not shirking my duties. So you got any questions, you email me. We can, do a virtual meet or whatever. Or if you want more resources on something like this, or there's something you're I feel totally jobbed that I didn't get to learn about, X, like give me something for that. I will do everything I can to get that to you. So, yeah.